Welcome. Thank you for joining me this morning to talk about math fluency. See some of you from my earlier session, so thanks for spending the morning with me and jumping right in. I wanted to share a little bit about me before we get started. So I know you all saw my bio. Things have changed slightly since that was submitted, and I have recently made a transition from the university to the St. Paul Public Schools in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I live. And so I'm still teaching classes at the university, but am now back in the building as a school psychologist, so that's my background. And I'm so happy to be there. It's given me some more recent school-based experiences to draw on for this other work, the other work that I do. So that's a little bit about me. I'm working in 2 elementary schools currently, and really happy to be back into it, back in the fray. I'd like to just see, by a show of hands, what you all do and what your backgrounds are in the schools. So can I see how many of you are in elementary schools, K-5 roughly? Okay, middle school? Ooh, okay. More than the last time. All right. And then secondary, high school? Anyone? Oh, okay. Excellent. How about my school psychologists? Okay. Just a few of us. That's all right. Small numbers but mighty. Great. So happy for you all to be here and for prioritizing math and fact fluency for your students. We will go ahead and get started. I apologize, I have not yet uploaded my PowerPoints to the conference site, but I will do that. And I just found out that you all had to find subs and be away from your kids to be at this conference. So kudos to you, that's impressive. In Minnesota, we have 2 days of PD, although people just take vacations. I went to Chicago. So there's no school in the whole state of Minnesota for things, theoretically, for something like this, and not many people do it. So extra credit to all of you for prioritizing your professional learning and being here this week, excuse me. Okay, so let's get started. Here's my plan for today. It might be a little ambitious, but I think we can do it. So we're going to start off by just going over what we already know about automaticity for math facts or math fact fluency. How do we build it for students? Now what? Like, what are you supposed to do with this information? I'll leave time for questions, and then I also have a slide of some of the resources that I reference, and then also some of my go-to stuff. All right, to get us started, I want you to just think for a moment about something that is automatic for you. How do you know it's automatic? How did it become automatic? It doesn't have to be academic related. It can be anything in your life. Okay, I saw a hand already. You thought of something right away. What is it? Your name.
I consider knowing your name to knowing your facts in school all the time.
Okay.
You shouldn't have to look for a folder to find a paper that hopefully with your name on. You should be able to tell me your name.
Great. Yeah, so knowing your name, recognizing your name in print. Good. That's certainly automatic for us. Yeah. Driving a car. That's yeah. Yes, driving a car. It's something you just get in and you just do. How many of you, this is like my favorite when people bring up this, how many of you have gotten to a destination without knowing how you got to that destination or have been unable to account for the past 5 minutes? Yes, all the time, right? Like that to me is like the hallmark of automaticity or fluency, right? We're just doing it and we're using brain power, but we're not even aware of the brain power that we're using. Good. Any other examples? Okay. There are so many in our lives, right? So we can think about like, how do we get there? And usually it involves a lot of modeling, a lot of repetition, a lot of feedback, right? All the things that we do for our students in school to help them become automatic in various academic skills. So when I say automaticity, I mean fluency, right, of math facts. And this I just define as the ability to deliver a correct answer immediately from memory without conscious thought, as opposed to relying on a calculation. People agree with that definition? It's kind of how we think about it? Okay. Yeah, so just like driving a car, right? We're not using our conscious thought, seeing our name. We just know it, okay? So this is one of my favorite theoretical frameworks for education. It's called the learning hierarchy and the instructional hierarchy. So they're in parallel, right? Because the learning is what the student is doing and the instruction is what we are doing. And those things need to match with where the student is in their learning with what we do as educators. And so when I'm thinking about automaticity and fluency, I'm at the second stage of learning. So our first stage, acquisition, this is where we are acquiring a new skill, we're learning, we're developing. Our responses are slow, they're inaccurate, they're more laborious, right? If we think about math facts, we might be doing some finger counting or skip counting or some other kind of strategy to help us get to an answer. We're making mistakes. And then we as educators need to pair that, right, with that stage of learning. And at that stage, that's when we're doing lots of modeling. We're giving explicit instruction on how to do it. Our feedback is fairly immediate and it should be corrective, right? Even if we think about the car example, right? Think back to when you were like 15, learning how to drive a car. You just got this learner's permit. Your parents are terrified. My parents were. And right, but even before you get into the car, you've received so much modeling, right? You've watched your parents drive or some other adult drive. You've seen people driving on the road. You've watched videos. You got instruction in class. People were telling you first do this, then do this. They're gradually releasing that responsibility of the driving to you. That's our explicit instruction. And believe me, my parents were yelling, "Oh my God, what's happening?" Like the second I made a mistake or "stop," right? That's that feedback we got during our driving. But eventually, kind of settle into things. I'm making fewer mistakes. I'm getting more comfortable. And I'm becoming more accurate, but I'm still having to put in a lot of conscious thought and effort, right, into my driving. And this happens with our academic skills as well, right? So at some point, then I'm moving into that fluency stage, which is our second stage and what we'll talk about today. So our accuracy is improved. And with fluency, for math, we think about 80 to 85% accuracy, 80 to 85% accuracy before we're ready to move into that fluent responding stage. And so that might seem really high. I don't know. To me, it does. But it's really not, right? That's sort of our Goldilocks, our good zone of learning, our just right area, where students can start working on things more independently. It's okay if they make some mistakes. We can give them some more novel practice opportunities and independent practice. Our feedback should be still fairly immediate, but starts to become a little bit more delayed, right? Maybe it's after they complete some independent work, then we're giving the feedback, right? We're not giving feedback problem by problem, as we might in the acquisition stage. And this is at the point, too, where we can start introducing some timed practice once we get into this accurate but slow responding stage. Okay. I'm not going to talk much about the last two stages, but those are important too. That's kind of when we can start extending our learning and moving into other types of work. Okay. So another way to think about this is through we acquire the skill, we work to maintain the skill, and then we can generalize the skill. So this is kind of a simplified version of the last slide. And so again, our fluent responding happens during this maintenance stage. This is where we want to increase exposure to material through increased repetition within and across our lessons and frequently review material. Okay, it's important. I'm going to assume that all of you agree with me because you're here. So I won't belabor this point, but automaticity is important. We know that it leads to better outcomes for students. We know that it positively predicts students' overall math proficiency well into middle school. We know that It develops iteratively with concepts and may support deeper understanding of both. So that's to say that sometimes students might learn the fact before they learn the concept, right? They mutually support each other, just like with other types of math. They might know the procedure first and want to know just how do I solve this? What are the steps? And then they go back and learn why that strategy might work. I don't know about you, but I was definitely one of those learners where I was really quick to pick up the steps for regrouping or carrying and borrowing as it was known then. Right? I could do it in my sleep. I was really fast with it, but I didn't totally understand why I was doing the steps, right? But eventually I did. Like once I got good with that, then I built in some space in my brain to unpack why that strategy worked. And that's true. We know this from research that it wasn't just me. Other kids are like this as well. And we see that with math facts too. Sometimes we might see memorization of facts before we see understanding of facts, but they do support each other. So if you see a kid like that, you don't need to stress or worry. Just think about what it is they're missing, and we go back and fill that in. Okay. We also know that fluency with basic facts, or automaticity, reduces cognitive load for other higher order tasks. So if we can fluently retrieve 3 plus 4, then we're not having to think so much about 30 plus 40, or 2/3 plus 2/4. That's a terrible example off the top of my head. But right, we can think about when those numbers appear in other types of math. We have those, and we don't have to go back to our fingers to count for those individual simple combinations. And then finally, I would encourage you all to think about direct retrieval as our most efficient strategy and effective strategy, right? So it's good to have those backup strategies, but equally important to just know it. So to illustrate this point, I like to go back to reading, even though reading is not exactly my background. But what's the first word on that slide? Importance, right? You just knew it. You looked at it and you knew it, right? I bet many of you have good phonics skills. And if you were approached with a word you didn't know, you could rely back on those the phonics strategies to sound out the word, to look at the building blocks of the word to figure out what it was. But you didn't need to, right? You just knew that this word was importance. At some point, you probably had to sound it out, right? Or chunk it, or do some other kind of reading strategy, but not anymore. So with math, we think about it in the same kind of way, right? It's good to have those backup strategies, because what if you're giving a presentation in front of a whole group of people and you lose your train of thought, and now you're like, oh, what's that word, right? You can sound it out. Okay. Oh, excuse me, I left Minnesota in here. But we also know that automaticity is important. It's in the Common Core standards. Pennsylvania is a Common Core state, is that right? Right, so it is in your standards, right? We're expected to teach kids to be fluent. And with Common Core, we see it, these are just a couple of examples, but add and subtract within 1,000 by the end of 3rd grade. Know from memory all products of 2 one-digit numbers by the end of 3rd grade, right? So we see this, these hints of fluency and automaticity referenced in our standards as well. Minnesota is an example, I don't even know. We have our own, we are only a partial adopt. So we have our own special standards for math that are separate from Common Core. So there are some debates about automaticity, right, and some fluency. And there is this debate on whether developing skills and symbols leads to conceptual understanding, or whether the presence of basic understanding should precede symbolic representation in skill practice. It's one of the basic disagreements of current mathematics education. The reality is that procedural fluency and conceptual understanding are often seen as competing for attention in school mathematics, but pitting skills against understanding creates a false dichotomy. The two are interwoven. So like I just mentioned, they do happen in tandem, and for some kids, and it's not consistent, right? For some kids, they learn procedures then concepts, or concepts then procedures, but it's not perfectly linear, right? And it might vary by math concept to math concept. Despite that, despite what we know, we still seem to approach math concepts first, then procedures. We don't really have a lot of good empirical evidence to support this approach, but it is a common practice, right? So I want to acknowledge that, that our curricula in math often tackle concepts first, and so it's common practice, but we don't have a lot of empirical support behind that. The development of conceptual understanding strategies and automaticity, like I said, it's not linear, and it will vary from topic to topic, and they do support each other. Okay, this is one of my favorite studies, so excuse me and let me get a little nerdy for just a moment. But this was a study done by some cognitive researchers on what they call instance-based retrieval, okay? So they were using arithmetic facts, and they wanted to see how people approach the problem. So these were, I believe, 2 by 1 digit, or 2 by 2 digit addition, okay? And so they showed people the problem, and, 2 digit by 1 digit multiplication. So they just showed them on repeat ad nauseum, okay? And then after each problem was solved, they asked people to self-report how they did it. What was the strategy they used? And we can see in the beginning that many people, the red line at the top, I know it's a little tricky to read, relied on some kind of algorithm. So maybe they were doing, if it was 23 times 5, maybe they're multiplying in the ones column first, like 5 times 3, and then going, regrouping and doing the whole thing, right? But it's all mental, right? They weren't given paper and pencil or anything. They had to just mentally solve it. Okay, then we see some people used some kind of repeated addition or a derived fact. Maybe they used some kind of a tens-based approach toward the bottom. And what we saw that over time, they relied less on this algorithm, this algorithmic processing, and instead switched over to retrieval. Okay, so these were adults, these weren't kids. But we can see that for some people in the beginning, they were using retrieval. Somehow, I don't even know where they found these people, just had this depth of automaticity, I don't know. But by the end, they had learned it to a point where they were just retrieving. And our brains are always looking for the most efficient way to do things, right? Much like water, looking for the paths of least resistance. And so we can see here that this became more efficient for people, right? They could still do the algorithmic processing. They had that strategy at their disposal, but they switched. So I don't know. I like to just, one of my favorite studies. Okay. So all that together, we know that teaching concepts and strategies with automaticity and using that timed practice does lead to improved outcomes, especially for our lower performing students. And students with who get that integrated approach generally perform better on measures of automaticity and can more flexibly apply their learning as well. All right, so how do we do it? So just again, let's take a moment, just with someone around you, elbow partner. What does math fluency look like in your school or in your classroom? What's working well, what isn't? So take a moment to just think and then share with somebody sitting close by. All right. So I would love to hear from you. What's happening with Fluency? How are you all, what does it look like in your school or in your classroom? Or not? Fully acknowledge it, it's not always happening. Yes?
Talk similarly a little bit about the fact that it exists but in very early grades and is not, it's taken a long time to have the aha of like we really need to create that.
Yeah.
Group.
Yep.
It's not automatic enough.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, this is something I hear a lot, right? It might happen in the elementary grades, but then falls off by middle school. And so you hear from so let me see the middle school people. Do you all feel like you're addressing fluency in some yeses, some no, not really? How many of you wish that your kids would come to you with automaticity? Yep, I hear that a lot too, right? That our middle school teachers are always like, oh, if only. Yeah, so great. So how do we build those routines in then to be consistent even into middle school? Because we do know that it is a predictor even through middle school. And how do we also shore up those skills in elementary school so that maybe you don't have to do as much at middle school, right? Good. Okay, someone behind you. Yes.
So just saying that it doesn't feel as purposeful as it should be at this point for us. And then we teach first grade, so we're doing a lot of like find the greater number and count on. We're teaching a lot of the procedural parts of that, but then kind of falling short with the
Yeah, great. So maybe it's not as intentional as you would like it to be, or you're working a lot on the strategies, but then finding it hard to make the leap into the fluency piece. Anyone else feel like they're in that situation? Maybe? Okay. All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I heard lots of talking, and I'm just going to assume that you were all on task. Okay. All right. So, so I think you guys brought up some really great points. The other thing we hear a lot is that if we teach the strategies, the automaticity will follow, right? And that's our hope, and it does happen for some students. But what we know is, especially for our lower achieving students, that this doesn't naturally develop necessarily. So we really do need to have that dedicated practice and instruction around automaticity in order for that to happen. Because certainly we will have students that will just naturally make the switch and it'll happen, and then for others, they will continue to rely on other backup strategies. Last year I did a small group math intervention with a group of third graders in my daughter's class, and these were kids who great attendance, engaged by all accounts, engaged in the classroom, and are still counting on fingers, right? And so that was a big focus for us in our time together in third grade. It worked, by the way. They made progress, and not just because I'm an awesome interventionist, but because they had that dedicated time of practice outside of their core. Oh, what did I do? Oh, okay, well, I hate to give away all my secrets. But yeah, we did, so perfect segue into this, is that we first did a screener, right? I wanted to find out, or a diagnostic. I wanted to find out where were they on the learning hierarchy? Were these kids that were still acquiring these basic facts? Or were they kids that had the strategies and could be accurate, but just weren't automatic, right? And what I found out was for these particular kids, they could do it. All the problems they attempted, they got right. They just did very few problems. And it was taking them a long time to do on like a 2-minute curriculum-based measure of facts. It took them a long time, but they got it right? So that's a win. Like they had the skills, but they needed that practice of retrieval. So we actually did something called explicit timing, which I will get to in a little bit. So we did a fluency intervention targeting that retrieval. So practice retrieving, trying to get a little quicker and not having to rely on the finger counting, which they were doing. And by the way, if I made them, it was habit, right? For them it was habit. If I made them sit on their hands, which I didn't do, but if I said, okay, try it, if I challenge them, do it without your fingers, they could do it, right? But it had become kind of this ingrained habit, and they hadn't had the practice of just automatically retrieving it. Okay. So of talked about this already, but we have this strategic counting, this pathway, right? And kind of the stages that most kids go into. And for those of you who joined me this morning, you'll have to excuse a little bit of repetition here, but it's important. But we have our counting all, and this is our least efficient and our least effective. And why do you think it's our least effective strategy?
Well, because like you did earlier, you almost messed up.
Exactly. Right. You're right. There's just a lot of information to keep track of, and you can make a mistake even if you are older, let's say. Okay. So if we have 3 plus 5, we count up from the first add-in, right? And we see kids doing this, right? Where they start and they say, maybe now they're saying 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, okay? And eventually, they move into, they realize that there's this thing called the commutative property, and 3 plus 5 is the same as 5 plus 3. So I can start with the larger addend. So now I can just say 5, 6, 7, 8, okay? Now, that doesn't just naturally happen. I would venture to guess that most of you are explicitly teaching this relationship and this jump, right? We heard it from our first grade team over here, like that's something they work on, right? And you do this in a multiple ways. Maybe you're using, strips, 5, why am I blanking on what those are called? 10 frames, 5 frames, thank you, number lines, right? Like you're showing, look at, they're the same thing, right? And so we can start with the bigger add-in. We might also start getting into decomposition, right? My now 7th grade daughter, she has a really hard time with math, and but decomposition was like her favorite thing in the world. She loved it, it made sense to her. She loved doing expanded form. She loved doing this work. So for her, this is a strategy she often goes back to when she encounters a new problem that she doesn't just know. So we can look at this, right? We can see 7 plus 8, same thing as 7 plus 7 plus 1. Maybe they know their doubles, right? Doubles, that's another great strategy. So we already know that double 7 is 14, plus 1 more, 15. So that's another strategy that students might use. And then finally we get to this mental retrieval, right? And that's our most efficient and our most effective, right? Because there are fewer chances for error because we've just learned it, we know it. If we encounter a problem we don't know, we have these backup strategies to go to, right? Just like with phonics. If we come to a word we don't know, we can sound it out, we know the building blocks. But ideally we're just reading, right? Or it becomes almost harder to not know that 3 plus 5 is 8 than it is to figure it out, right? Like have you ever done that reading challenge where somebody puts a word up and says don't read it, but like it's already too late? Yeah, right? So that's kind of our goal for math facts too. We want it to go up and you can't not know the answer because you just know you've gotten to that point. Okay. We also need to do this with multiplication and fractions. I know I showed you addition examples, but we know that fluency with multiplication facts facilitates reasoning about fractions and rational numbers. It permits understanding of equivalent fractions. It helps us understand that they have the same location on the number line. How many of you have a love-hate relationship with number lines? So yeah, okay. Number lines are so great and so important and so hard at the same time. Okay. We also know that fluency with multiplication facts helps us illustrate the relationship between those improper fractions and mixed numbers. Okay, so we can see here just some examples there. And we really, in our kindergarten through 4th grade, roughly, we're focusing primarily on our whole numbers, right? But at 5th grade, we start to transition more to rational numbers. And so it's so important that students have that basic whole number knowledge secure or nearly secure by 5th grade, right? Just like our standards want us to, so that that transition into rational numbers and then pre-algebra and getting to be algebra ready will be in place. And we don't need all of our kids to become engineers, right? But we want them to have the option, right? My son 7th grader's not going to be an engineer. But my 4th grader might. She loves math. Having fluency with division and fractions also helps us be more flexible, right? So it's interesting. It's always interesting to me when you, that same group of 3rd graders I was talking to you about, they're like, oh, we can't do division. And then I might say something like, well, if I brought 6 cookies and there are 3 of us, how much would we each get? And they're like, 2. I was like, okay, well, you just did division, right? And so sometimes kids know without knowing. But we can see that flexibility, right? And I don't know how they solved that problem mentally, right? I can't look into their brains. But they can start to understand those equal shares or unequal shares, the improper fractions, right? And then that helps us lead into our rational numbers, so knowing that 3/7 is the same as 3 divided by 7, right? Okay, so our goal is to dedicate at least 10 minutes a day to fact fluency. Does that feel like a challenge, a lift for you all? Finding 10 minutes? Yeah. So I talked about this earlier this morning, and I don't have it here, but if we can kind of get a little bit creative about how we're structuring our math time, right? So if we have a 60-minute math block with 30 minutes of intervention, we might do 15 minutes in the beginning as a warm-up or a fact fluency practice, followed by our core instruction, and then bookended with some differentiation or review of topics, right? So you might think about incorporating it into some of your review time. Okay, we can also rely on some technology. So when kids get to that fluent responding phase, or when they're ready to start working on that proficiency stage, right, they've developed the accuracy, they can start to do more independent practice with this. So if they're at 80% or 85% accurate, then that's when we can start using things like extra math or some other fact fluency building technology to support. Spring Math is great. I've heard from a couple of people in our last session that their districts use Spring Math. Is that something anyone's familiar with here? So that's a fact fluency, a class-wide fact fluency intervention program that has some of those diagnostic assessments built into it with worksheets that align with what your class needs and guidelines for how and when students reach mastery. Excuse me. You can also be thinking about cooperative groups, so you can do teams or peer tutoring. This works well for a number of reasons. One, it works to help develop the academic skills, but there's also some benefits socially, right? It can help build some of those, give opportunities for developing social skills. You can also rely on things like response cards, and flashcards, whiteboards, right? Choral responding, stuff like that. Some of this you're probably already doing, right? And aren't maybe connecting it to what I'm talking about. And then we also, want to make sure kids do have those backup strategies as well, right? We're not ignoring this. We want them to have these. And if they do first are one of those kids that first memorize, then without having the backup strategies, we still want to make sure that they understand that, right? Just like if a student learns to read miraculously by just picking it up, right? We still want to make sure they have those phonics skills to support their reading. And then, of course, making sure that we're explicitly teaching and helping students apply these different properties of cumulative and distributive. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a moment. Any questions come up so far? Wonderings, needs for clarification. Okay. All right, this next part is going to get a little technical, but you'll have to forgive me, or don't. It's fine. I'm a school psychologist, so I love data. So this is where we're gonna get a little nerdy again. Okay, but I like to look at numbers. I like to have data help me drive my decisions. It's not perfect, of course, but it provides a good guideline. This decision tree is from a book by Robin Connie, Brian Concy, and Rob Volpe. I'll show you a picture of it at the end. It's effective math instruction. But it's really a nice way to use the screening data you might have or diagnostic data you have on fact fluency and then help pair it up with an appropriate intervention that will connect to that. So I should stop for a moment because I see DCPM up there, which means something to me, may not mean something to you. So DCPM stands for digits correct per minute. It is much like words read per minute, but we're looking at digits. Now, you are all educators, and I'm going to brace myself because you're going to be like, Anne, that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. It doesn't make sense. That's not how math works. But I'm asking you to trust me as a psychometrician that this is a thing we should do, okay? So, digits correct per minute. Usually I have a whiteboard. Okay, imagine for yourself. Go on this journey with me. Imagine you have the problem 15 plus 13. That answer is 28. And you knew that because you were fluent in your single digit facts and probably knew right away that 3 plus 5 is 8. We did that earlier. And 1 plus 1 is, 110 plus 110 is 20, right? 28. Okay, so how many digits are in our answer 28? 2 digits, okay? If a student answers 28 on that problem, we are giving them a score of 2. 2 digits correct. If they answered 25, how many digits did they provide us? They provided 2 digits. They got how many of those digits correct? 1 digit, okay? If they answered 18, how many digits correct did they have? 1. They got the ones digit correct. If they answered 82, how many digits correct did they get? 0, because it is in the wrong place value, okay? That's your crash course on digits correct per minute, okay? But the reason we use it, not because we are okay with students getting answers partially correct, but we use it because in psychometrics and in measurement, it's more sensitive to change, okay? It allows us to see change and measure progress in a way that's a little more nuanced than just correct answer. All right, but you can kind of, if it helps you, you can think of this roughly as divided by 2. Most of our answers have 2 digits. So 40 digits correct per minute is roughly, but not exactly, 20 problems if we're thinking about multi-digit answers. But it could be more than that if we're thinking about single digit addition where you have like 3 plus 5, 8, that's 1 digit correct. Is everyone with me so far? Okay. The students I teach get like an entire semester on this, so you just mastered it in 2 minutes. Congratulations. Okay, so we're doing our screener. We're giving a worksheet that's got just math facts, math combinations, could be could be multi-digit, could be complex, could be single digit and simple. But we're looking at this, okay? We want them to have at least 40 digits correct per minute and at least 80% accurate to be considered fluent. All right. So we look at that. If the scores are less than 40% or 40 digits correct per minute, we're documenting it here, and we have it broken down by addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and you can see there's a place for marking both their fluency score, their digits correct per minute, because that per minute is what tells us about fluency, right? It's a rate-based measurement. And then our percent accuracy, okay? Those 2 pieces are important. We need to know both. And we need to know both because we are all huge fans of the learning hierarchy. And if a student is slow and inaccurate, we're going to do something different with them than if a student is slow but accurate. And if they are slow and accurate, then we're probably not worrying so much about fluency for that student. Can I just do a really quick nonverbal check, formative check? Put your thumb up in the air if you're tracking with me. You'll get there, you're feeling okay. You have no idea what room you're in. Okay, do it again, because I didn't get to see everybody. Okay, yes, great. All right, so we do this. We look at our decisions. How are students performing, okay? For students who perform between 0 and 20 digits correct per minute, actually I'm going to start us on the bottom, okay? For those students who score the lowest, fewer than 10 digits correct per minute, and their accuracy is less than 60%. So they're slow and they're inaccurate. Can anyone tell me what stage of the learning hierarchy that is? Yes, acquisition, right? That's our acquisition stage. They're at the very beginning. They're acquiring the skill. For those students, we should consider a flashcard drill and practice intervention. Okay? Something like incremental rehearsal. Anyone know what that is? It's like also another one of my favorites. I should be like Oprah and put together like my favorite things list. Okay. All right, so we should use the flashcard drill and practice intervention. For those students scoring between 0 and 20 digits correct per minute, but their accuracy is a little higher, between 60 and 90%, we might use something like CCC, cover, copy, compare. Okay, so these are students that are still slow. They're still not as accurate maybe as we'd like them to be. They're getting there, they're approaching the accuracy, so they can do a little bit of independent practice, but we still, with cover, copy, compare, they're going to get the modeling that they need, right? Okay. For those students who score between 20 and 29 digits correct per minute and have accuracy of greater than 90%, so this threshold is even higher than the one I said earlier, right? 80 to 85. So we want to be we're being even more conservative on their accuracy. We really want them to know it. Then we might use a different version of cover, copy, compare, or something called taped problems. Now, taped problems is great, but it's a little bit more cumbersome in the schools. It's a little bit harder to do because there's like anyone know what this is? Okay, so taped problems is you have a sheet or a worksheet, right? The student sees the problems, and they're also listening to some kind of audio, or they have somebody sitting with them. And they give them like a 5 or something second delay to answer it, and then they say the answer. So they would say 3 plus 5, and then there would be a time delay. 8, 7 plus 5, 12, right? So there's a time delay, and the goal is for the student to correctly answer the problem before they hear the verbal prompt. But it's a little bit more cumbersome because you have to make the recording, right? Or somebody has to. Excuse me. Then we have those students who are scoring between 30 and 40 digits correct per minute and have accuracy of greater than 90%. And for these students, these are the students for which we would want to start doing some kind of timed practice. Okay? They're accurate, they're consistently getting the problem correct, they're fairly quick, or fairly automatic, but they're not quite where we want them to be. So in this case, we want to give them some more practice with that automatic retrieval and getting a little faster. Not so dissimilar for what we do with reading and repeated reading. I'm only using reading examples because people are usually more familiar with that. You all know what repeated reading is? Okay. Yeah, so some explicit timing is very similar to what we do with repeated reading, but it's with math facts. Okay. For those students, I didn't highlight this, but for those students that are scoring more than 40 digits correct per minute across all 4 operations, then we can move on to the next skill that's considered mastered, and then we're moving on. Okay, so this is really just focused on our single-digit multiplication rules. All right, so incremental rehearsal, one of my favorite things. So incremental rehearsal is a flashcard intervention. The thing I love so much about it is that, like cover, copy, compare, it's very flexible. The procedure is exactly the same, but the content can vary, right? So we can do math facts. You all have flashcards in your classroom? Math facts? Okay, good. So it can be math facts. It can be sight words. It can be letter sounds, letter names, it can be vocabulary. You can use incremental rehearsal in a very flexible way. It's excellent for students who need acquisition-based intervention. Okay, so what you do for incremental rehearsal is you are going to identify known and unknown math facts. So you're going to sit with them and kind of do a little pretest, right? You're going to show them the math fact, and if they can correctly give you the answer within about 3 seconds, we will say, okay, that one's automatic, they know it, we're going to put it in this pile. If it takes them longer than about 3 seconds or they get it incorrect, we're going to put it over here, and that we consider to be unknown, all right? They might be accurate, it just takes them longer, or they're using these other strategies. But remember, our goal is automaticity. So that goes into the unknown. Then what we do is we create a ratio of known and unknown facts of about 1 to 8 or 1 to 9. So we're teaching 1 unknown fact with 8 or 9 known facts. So they're going to get repeated practice with the ones they already know, and they're going to get a lot of modeling and explicit instruction and immediate feedback on the one they're learning. Okay, that's what makes it an acquisition intervention. So what you do is you start with this, and you're going to show them the unknown fact first. And let's just stick with our example of 3 plus 5. Okay, so they'll see the card, and you'll say 3 plus 5 is 8. What's 3 plus 5? Good. So then you show 3 plus 5, and then you're going to show a card they already know. Okay, so maybe the next card is 5 plus 2. So you would say 8, and then, actually that would be terrible. You wouldn't want to do that. Those are too closely related. 1 plus 1. Okay, 3 plus 5, so you would say 8. Then you would say 2. Good. Then you'd show 8 again, 3 plus 5 again. Then you're showing you're showing 2 cards that they know. Then you're going to show the unknown card again. Now you're going to show 3 cards they already know, and then show the unknown card. Now 4 cards they already know, then the unknown, et cetera, until they see 9 cards they know, and then they see the card they don't know again. I won't go into all of the nuance of why this is so effective, but there's a lot of research from cognitive psychologists to show that this is a really great way for acquisition of knowledge, retention of knowledge, and also gives practice in retrieval, okay? So just trust me, even though don't ever trust somebody who says trust me, but I am asking you to trust me. Okay, so once you get through that whole sequence, they've seen all of the cards. You've gone through 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, blah, 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 blah. Now the card 3 plus 5, we're going to consider that to be known. Now they know it, it's automatic. We're going to keep it in the stack though, because they still need to practice this, right? And so now 3 plus 5, you see the asterisk here, becomes our first known card. And we're going to give another one. Now maybe it's 5 plus 7. So again, you'd show 5 plus 7. 5 plus 7 is 12. What's 5 plus 7? Great. So they see 5 plus 7, then they're going to see 3 plus 5. 5 plus 7, 3 plus 5, 1 plus 1. 5 plus 7, 3 plus 5, 1 plus 1, 2 plus 6. Et cetera, and you just continue the same procedure. You can continue that procedure and keep adding new facts to teach until they make 3 errors on any card. But once they make 3 errors, that's your cue to be like, all right, that's enough for today. They've sort of reached their capacity. Anything you try to shove into their brain after that is going to be a worthless effort. They're going to start making mistakes on ones they know as well. Okay. Yes?
What if there's not that many notes?
Great question. So it doesn't have to all be the same thing. It could just be anything that they know that you could put on a flashcard. It could be a blotch of red. It could be a color. It could be a number, single number. It could be, really the known part is just to help provide that spacing and give them practice in that delayed retrieval of the fact. And then as they acquire more facts, then you can include those, right? Yes?
Consider 2 plus 3 and 3 plus 2 different knowns.
I would test for it, and then make a note to yourself that we need to review the commutative property. But it shouldn't be, right? But it might be. It might be for the students that need acquisition, it might be, they might view it as two separate facts. Okay. I love incremental rehearsal, you guys. It's very cool. The other thing I'll say about this is once you learn it, it's so easy, right? You could do this with some coaching. Peers can do it for each other. A para can do it. A parent volunteer, right? Like you don't need a big educational background in order to flip through some flashcards, right? So as long as you know the procedure. So that's also great because I don't know about you, but my buildings have limited resources for this kind of stuff. Okay. Cover, copy, compare I mentioned earlier as well. This is another great flexible intervention. There's research to support its use in spelling as well, for any of you that are looking for spelling intervention. But for the context of math, there are different ways to do it. This is just one way, but you study the problem. 8 + 1 is 9. You study it, you cover it. Then in the first box, you're going to write 8 + 1 is 9. They'll uncover it and compare their work. Is it the same? If yes, I'll move on to the next problem. If the answer is no, I'm going to try again. 8 + 1 is 9. I'm going to cover again and try in box 1B. 8 + 1 is 9. This can also be done in peer groups. It can be done in whole classroom, right? You can do it with all your kids at one time during warm-up. It can be individualized, small group. It's a nice, really flexible one. This worksheet happens to be from a website called Intervention Central where you can create them. I'm going to show you some examples in a moment from another site where they're already created. And all you have to do is click print, which is what I did in the group I mentioned earlier. Okay. Explicit timing is another intervention. And again, that we talked about in our decision tree. So explicit timing is for those kids who are accurate, highly accurate, and approaching fluency but are not quite there yet. And so this is where you set a practice. It's usually brief, 3 to 10 minutes. And it's like repeated practice, again, like repeated reading. So you'll tell students, we're going to work on this for 5 minutes. And you'll do 1 or 2 minute intervals. So you'll set a timer for 1 minute, do as many problems as you can in 1 minute. When the minute's over, place a bracket, check your work. Okay, we're going to start again the next minute. So you do it, 5 times if we're doing 1 minute intervals for 5 minutes. And then students correct their work, provide some feedback. Again, just want to reiterate, this is for the students that are already accurate, right? They already have demonstrated accuracy. So this is that MIND website I mentioned. So this is the measures for intervention and numeracy development, I believe is what it stands for. So you can just see a couple of different examples. This happens to be for single-digit addition, cover, copy, compare. Here we can see it used for fact families. Here we can see for regrouping or a more complex operation. They also have explicit timing sheets for you to use. So this is, kind of like a basic worksheet. Here it's slightly different where they have to fill in not just the answer, but in some problems the missing addend, for example. So blank plus 8 is 16. They would have to fill in the 8. And then here we can see it with multi-digit addition and subtraction. Okay, so we're going back, got our decision tree, okay? I'm going to give you a chance to talk to your partner again. I'm going to show you some data. That's what I do, okay? And I'm going to have you be thinking about this framework, and I'm going to have you make a few decisions on how you would group your students and what interventions you would give them if this was your class. Are we ready? Okay, you got this. I believe in you. So the very first question we always have to ask is this a class-wide problem? Okay? We would know it's a class-wide problem if our median, so not the average, not the mean, but the median is less than our criteria. Okay? So does our median appear to be less than 40? No. Okay. How about our accuracy? Is our accuracy less than 80? Median of our accuracy? No. Good. Not a class-wide problem. Okay? So if it's not a class-wide problem, then we can start thinking about grouping. If it is a class-wide problem, then we need to think about a class-wide intervention, right? Matt Burns, who was my advisor at the U, used to talk about if you have a class-wide problem but try to do tier 2 intervention with everyone, it's like taking Band-Aids to a battlefield, right? Like you're not going to stop the bleeding. You really need to address the class-wide problem if you have one. All right. So if there's no class-wide problem, then one way to do it is to look at your lowest 25%. Now this will vary, and my favorite response to people is, well, it depends, right? There are a lot of factors that play here. This is very simple because we're in a controlled environment, and you probably have a million other questions about the kids and their data here, right? Like, well, what about this? I'd want to know that. Have they done this or that? What's their attendance look like? Let's just assume that everything else is awesome, okay? There's nothing else to know. But if you have the resources, you can start with the lowest 25%. If you have a lot of resources, you could address even the lowest 30 or 40% of students. If you have fewer resources, then you might have to make some tough choices like, do we go with the highest of the low and get those kids up to speed first? Do we go with the lowest of the low and try to bring them up? Right? So those are some decisions that you'd have to make as a grade and building level team about how do we allocate our resources. Okay, I've identified the lowest 25% of students for you. So we have, these are just people in my life, so they're not real data, not real people. So we have Aaron, George, Clark, and Eli, and we can see their digits correct per minute along with their accuracy. Okay? So if we look back here, I'm going to ask you to make some decisions with somebody close by about what kind of intervention would you provide these 4 students? Would you group them? Would you do something individual? Okay. Are we ready? As ready as you're going to be? Okay. So I'll put the data back up. Excuse me. And we'll take a couple of minutes. I want you to think about what you would do for these kiddos. All right. All right. I know you didn't have enough time, and I know it was tricky because you couldn't see simultaneously the decision tree and the data. So thank you for doing your best. So what I want to hear from somebody. Just tell me one of the groupings or decisions you made for a student or students. Eli's almost there.
He just needs a little bit more time.
Sure. So what would you?
Time back probably or something like that to build him up.
Yeah. Yeah. So Eli, probably explosive timing would be appropriate for him. He's nearly there on his fluency. He's very accurate. Everything he attempts, he's gotten right. Do people agree? Yeah. Okay. Great. Yes.
I was curious if Aaron is close to Eli because he's 29, not quite 30, which is the cutoff, and he's 95% accuracy. So he's close to Eli as well.
So what would you do?
If I'm low on resources and don't have a lot of meat or other people, I might group the two of them.
Okay. Anyone else think about it that way? Sure. Yeah. What other things were you thinking about or decisions did you make? Yeah.
George is slowly accurate, so perhaps a cover copy compared with.
Sure. Anyone else think cover, copy, compare for George? Okay. All right, what did you all want to do with Grant, or with Clark, excuse me? You'd pair him with George, okay? What did other people think?
He needs work on his accuracy, so he needs that known, unknown pile.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure, so maybe incremental rehearsal because he's slow and inaccurate. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay. Here's the big reveal. Now, as you all noted, even with this very straightforward data, there are different decisions that can be made, right? And those things might be based on resources. They might be based on dynamics of the class, time available. If we're strictly following the criteria, this is what I decided to do. But I would also support grouping Aaron and Eli together for the reasons that we said, right? Very close, basically 30. Especially when we're thinking digits correct. It's not problems correct. But we might also want to get him more firmly or more securely in that accuracy space, in which case we could do a cover, copy, compare. And again, you as his teacher will know, is this 29 consistent with what we see in his other classroom work? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's actually a low estimate of his skills in classroom, what you see in the classroom. Maybe it's a high estimate. Right? And so that's kind of the other context that you will be considering, right? Because you will have more information and know more about these kids. Okay, again, more data. So intervention match matters. Being intentional and thoughtful about how we're grouping kids, what we're doing to intervene with them does matter. Especially as we're thinking about progress monitoring. So I would encourage you all in all of your academic skill areas, reading, math, writing, to be considering both fluency and accuracy because of this learning hierarchy issue, and because as we're monitoring progress, our data is going to look different for each kid based on match and based on what it is our intervention is intended to do. So with our acquisition interventions, things like incremental rehearsal, the splash card, where kids are slow and inaccurate, what is our goal? Is our goal to improve their accuracy or to improve their fluency, their speed? Yeah, their accuracy. We want to improve their accuracy, right? So if we're monitoring progress only with fluency measures and we're only looking at fluency, would you expect to see progress? Probably not, right? They're not working on fluency. Maybe you would see a little bit of a jump, but they might look like a kid who's not responding to intervention. And then you'd be like, oh man, I've been doing this thing and it's not working. But it actually is because their accuracy is improving, right? So we got to be thinking about what it is, matching our measure also to what the goal of the intervention is. Okay, here's just an illustration. Okay, so this is a study that we did where we actually intentionally mismatched intervention from baseline. So we see baseline is our first column, and these are kids, this is their fluency data. So we see kids first, if they needed acquisition, we gave them a fluency intervention. If they needed a fluency intervention, we gave them acquisition. We gave them the wrong thing on purpose. What do we see in the second column? Would we say these kids are making progress? No. Pretty similar to baseline, right? Okay? Didn't work. We gave them the wrong thing. They didn't make progress. Not surprising, right? If you have a viral infection and your doctor gives you an antibiotic, the antibiotic's not really doing anything because it's not bacterial. At least that's what they tell me. Okay. So then in their last column, we gave them the correct intervention. If they needed acquisition, we gave them acquisition. If they needed fluency, we gave them fluency. Now what do we see? Progress? Yeah, we see some progress. Might be variable, right? But we don't, that's kids. Kids are variable. but we see some progress. So when we give them what they need, we're going to see progress. So if you do see no progress, ask yourself, are we measuring the right thing? And did we give them the right thing? So those should be your first two questions before you jump to the they're responding or they're not responding conclusion. Okay. All right, so now what? I just gave you all this information. Now you have to go back to your classrooms and do something with it. So these are just summary of my recommendations on what we talked about today. So be flexible. Be as flexible as you can be. There's more than one way to accomplish your goal. Okay? Some students will learn procedures and develop automaticity and conceptual understanding later, and vice versa. Teach those things together, right, in concert, and dedicate time daily for practice for everyone. Here are those resources I promised. Okay, so we have the Evidence-Based Intervention Network from the University of Missouri, Mizzou. They provide intervention recommendations according to the learning hierarchy for math, for reading, and behavior. It's a fantastic website. Intervention Central is useful as well. It's an older website, but there are still some goodies in there. The measures and interventions for numeracy developed mind, those were those cover, copy, compare, and explicit timing worksheets that I showed you. It's free, which is great. The Science of Math is a work group that is dedicated to putting out recommendations supported by evidence that we have. The National Center for Intensive Intervention has some fabulous, fabulous math resources. It's free. There are also those tool charts for intervention materials and progress monitoring measures. And then finally, the What Works Clearinghouse. And I'm recommending that not just for the ability to look up available evidence for curriculum and other things, but they have some really nice practice guides that summarize all of the stuff out there, all the research and evidence, into a really easily digestible and practical summary. And then these are just some books. This is the one, The Effective Math Interventions is the book where we got that decision tree from. So this is a really great book. They're relatively inexpensive and available from, all these books are from Guilford Publishing. I will post this PowerPoint, I haven't yet, but here are a couple of research articles that I referenced about what I talked about. And then we have just 1 minute for questions. I'm so sorry. I will stick around, though, if you have some questions that we don't get to. Anyone have anything they would like to ask they didn't get to? All right, I'm going to pass it back to Bryn for another quick announcement. Here's my contact information. If anything comes up or you have questions or would like some resources, I'm happy to talk later as well.
Thank you.